Hello and welcome to the second part of the 88 Supercar Challenge, looking at stats in automation for each of the cars and just sort of going over them in depth. First up, from Stellar Gale, the Thunderbolt LM62 Turbo Harrier. I almost missed that last word because I was reading at the top there. Anyway, yeah, a sort of Dower 962 inspired car, I think. At least that's where I see from this a sort of road-going Le Mans car, basically. This car has some fantastic details. I gave it a 8 out of 10, I think, if I'm remembering that correctly. It'll be a bit awkward if I misremembered, but it's fine. You'll see the final scores and complain if I got it wrong. Anyway, yeah, this car has some great detail. I love the fuel caps, using a tail light as the sort of where the fuel hose would go in, and things like the diffuser strakes, extending them using mud flaps, like this in the actual diffuser fixture, but then sort of dragging them out by using the mud flaps. I think that's a very nice detail. Some very nice care put into this, into like all the vents and cooling and things. It does look like a racing car of the time. I could see something like a vent going down there, having like an intercooler here, and that's where all the hot air gets funneled out, stuff like that. And it all just makes a lot of sense. I do have a couple of complaints. I do think these vents down at the bottom look a bit out of place. They're just sort of really square. I know the front of it's really square with these lights and things, but just the way they're sort of shoved onto the front here when you've got this nice curved bit here, I sort of think that ruins it. Yeah, the front diffuser, another nice detail. Shame you can't have a front diffuser like on actual Le Mans cars, but still. Wheel colour, I have no idea what they were going for here. I assume gold, like they were trying to go for gold wheels, and just doesn't work. Sort of messed up the colour shadings a bit, in my opinion. It's got fiberglass panels. Yeah, for some reason the bodywork is sort of a carbon fiber look. Not really sure what that's about either. And then just sort of little things like the lights here, I don't think really fit with the body that well. I know it is a race car. I like some tail lights. I mean, the actual race car wouldn't have had it, so they would have been slapped on. So I suppose realism there. Which I can appreciate, but at the same time I don't think it's particularly good looking, if that makes sense. So I don't know, that's sort of a positive and negative. But yeah, overall I think this is a fantastic looking car for what it is. So yeah, definitely fits the theme, and I think it's a nice take on this challenge. Going to the chassis, fiberglass panels, as I've said. This car is high in fibre with a carbon fibre chassis. Yeah, and again, just full race car. It just makes sense, really. Double wishbones, longitudinal mid-engine, 700 horsepower, with a little bit of engine stress, which to be honest makes sense. It's going to be pushing the engine a bit, and it doesn't need to be ultra reliable. And as I said, if it's over 47 reliability, then it's good enough. Very high-end bottom end. The crank is actually slightly overkill. I suppose there is a decent bit of weight saving you can get there, 3 kilograms. But at the same time, it is a bit more expensive. Maybe you could get away with a bit more quality or something by running the forged steel. I don't know. Or maybe they'd already tried that and that was just the last thing they were dumping engineering time into. Cam profile is actually slightly overkill. At 100. I was knocking if I do that, but if I should just to demonstrate, you can see, yeah, just dragging it down a bit, you can get a bit more power and sort of encourage it to make power a bit earlier. Let's go and return that back to standard though. So I think it depends really if you want to optimize more for like the very end of the power curve. But yeah, just sort of losing a bit of power there, I suppose. Running loads boost, 2.3 bar, and big intercooler. It is still slightly restricted, so there is again a bit more power to be gained from there. But I think I'd did try messing around with it, and it did lose a bit of bottom end power from it. So I think that just really depends on sort of the setup you want to go for there. All this just basically just race car. One thing to note, the ignition timing is insanely low, and there's actually a decent amount of power to be gained just by adjusting this. So I made a slight tweak to the ignition timing, not totally optimized. We could probably go a bit further, to be honest, but you can already see there's like a 20 horsepower gain there just by increasing it to a more sensible level. And yeah, so basically I was running way too low of an ignition timing there, really. I mean, you could probably make it a bit richer, although this car does have the lowest fuel economy of any car that was entered. Yeah, you could sort of see that in the high end. It's not actually the worst. 76% high RPM, that's not terrible compared to some of the other cars, but at the same time it's not fantastic either. On the exhaust side, dual exhaust, and you can get a tiny bit more power. I've just realised, oh no, good. That was a bit weird that I needed to update it though before it returns to normal. On the exhaust side, you can get a bit more power by increasing the exhaust diameter, but then you start to build up weight, and there's low end power as well that you need to take care of. So I'd say overall this is quite a good setup, just a single straight through, and thanks to turbos it is actually somewhat quiet at a sub 60 loudness. Nothing to talk about on body quality or anything. 0 to 60 of 5 seconds. This is one of the fastest cars we've got, 209 miles an hour, and yeah, it certainly is quick. Acceleration not the most mind blowing. I think thanks to tyre sizes, only 265 on the back. So yeah, and there is a gear change right before it hits 62, but I don't think it's really 47. We just experiment quickly. Yeah, it makes no difference really. Exact same thing, although apparently a bit more sportiness. I suppose reducing wheel spin, making it a bit easier, I don't know. Also viscous diff, which as we saw last time, or in BMG even, viscous diff, at least on the pickup truck, didn't end well. According to our test driver, made it feel really awkward because of the way it locks and unlocked. So I have a feeling we might see that again on this car, especially with the amount of power it had, this has, could cause some issues. 265 tyres on the back there, which, yeah, as I said, kind of narrow for the power figure we've got, but maybe it'll work out alright. Brakes are sort of overkill. I do kind of get this, try to minimise brake fade, but at the end of the day it's doing 209 miles an hour. You can afford to have some brake fade, and you can see the way sportiness jumping up just by making the brakes a bit less powerful. Right, if I were to just hold it quickly, not go that low, but yeah, we switched to 2 pistons, and you can really see there's a bit of an improvement. I could probably spend longer fine tuning it. Yeah, I probably shouldn't start talking now about that and sort of struggle to fine tune it, but yeah, you can see there is gains to be made just by adjusting the brakes here, making them a bit less powerful. You can get away with some fade. I think if it's a very high percentage, worry, but like under 5% or anything. I think it also depends on top speed, but 209 miles an hour, you've got like 5-10% brake fade even. That's not too terrible. Onto the aerodynamics. Bit of brake airflow, which useful for cooling the brakes when you've got high speeds. And bit of wing angle. It does have a diffuser at the front and at the back, but in BMG the only thing that matters is this wing. So yeah, probably a bit less than 230 kilograms. in BeamNG because the diffusers don't count. But I'm not actually sure how useful that is because it's, well, it is sort of oversteery, but actually if we look at this line, it is all in the understeer, so I'm not sure it'll be that useful. We'll have to see. But then, yeah, bit of quality there, and it is pushing the reliability limits, so no need to, you can't really get away with point-end cooling airflow. Sport with a standard cassette interior with +7 quality. Assume to try and get some weight out there, and also for comfort, I suppose, although there is a bit of wiggle room there to play with. And drive aids, interestingly, it's only got hydraulic power steering. I don't really get this. I would have thought either other option would have made a lot more sense for a race car like this. But yeah, just having hydraulic seems like a worst of both worlds. You don't get the sportiness, or you get a big sportiness penalty on this compared to both of them. You can see there, and you can get above 70, I believe. Yeah, although admittedly it does kill comfort. And yeah, I mean, there is a bit of fuel economy losses from having like variable hydraulic, but at the end of the day there's still a bit of sportiness in there, and it does help keep comfort up. So yeah, I personally don't get it. I know there's like 3 kilograms more weight and maybe engineering time, but I don't know, I would have thought running none would be fine. Maybe you just have to compromise with suspension or exhaust setups or whatever too much that it just isn't worth it. I'm not sure. Safety is a bit weird. I'm not sure why they're running standard 80s with a bit of extra quality. Thanks to a carbon fibre chassis, it is well over the minimum. The only thing could be, maybe it was set up to have a space frame originally, and maybe it's still well over there. So yeah, I'm not sure what that's about at all. So interestingly, comfort goes way up with a space frame. Interesting to note. Yeah, that's just a bit odd. I did have a bit of a mess around. You can actually, I think, get away with running none with 0 quality if you're really feeling that brave. So yeah, that's a possibility. But even just running like standard 80s and then dragging down the quality, there's decent amount of weight to lose there. And so the final interesting thing to note about this car, hydropneumatic suspension. I assume this was done entirely to get comfort over the minimum and still have a sort of aggressive suspension setup. I'd love to see, or I can't wait to see how this works out in BeamNG, if it works out well. But yeah, hydropneumatics heavy is the thing. You can see just changing it there, there's a good 40 kilograms to save, bit of sportiness. But yeah, of course, it's trying to get the comfort, and also I guess a prestige penalty, so maybe it does sort of balance out there. But yeah, there's more prestige gain than sportiness, I think, from the math I'm doing in my head. I don't even want to think about it. Might be wrong actually. You know, I won't try and do maths while recording, and probably off. But yeah, just a bizarre choice, but I don't know, it's interesting. Not the most realistic choice, obviously, but maybe it'll work out fine. Suspension setup, otherwise, fairly standard stuff. It's pretty well balanced for a actually drivability setup. Front is a bit stiff, but yeah, you know, it's nearly there basically. And has a very low roll angle, thanks to very low ride height, and not too crazy stiff sway bars, but they are still somewhat stiff, and then fair amount of rear camber. Anyway, I think I've managed to glitch the wheels by reloading the chassis and stuff. But yeah, I've been talking about this car for far too long now. It is really interesting though. But yeah, next car. From the Real Emile, we have the, we're not even going to try and pronounce that, Curva Super Road Car V10 Concept 88 Edition Plus. I believe that translates to great success, I think he told me. So there's that. This, it's an interesting car. I say that about everything, so that doesn't mean much. I kind of like this styling, or I like what it was going for, sort of a concept car, So I mean, it looks maybe a bit more 90s with the rained headlights and everything. I think it's got some good ideas going on. Like, I do like the way the wing is sort of curved with the back of the body, and these vents along the back there. There's some good ideas there. I think this sort of works, but these vents, I don't know, I'm not a fan of the way they stick down. I think that sort of ruins the flow a bit, if that makes sense. So yeah, things like that, and little details like the fog light and reverse light on the back. They are good, but at the same time, it sort of doesn't really flow together. You have things like these headlight clusters with like an awkward gap in the middle. Maybe it needs like a surround. Maybe it's like another headlight painted plastic, and use that so it looks a bit more. You don't have this awkward body coloured bit in the middle of the headlights, and then at the back, just so the tail lights doesn't really mesh together well with this vent. Otherwise, it's, yeah, pretty cool in sort of a, I don't know, vaporwave sort of style. I'm not really sure I'm using that right. I don't really know what vaporwave is. But yeah, I know it's got sort of the bright colours. Sort of very, don't know, concept car styling. With the exception of these hinges, which look really out of place on here, in my opinion. And they're sort of on backwards, maybe. I don't know, I feel like they should hinge the other way, but so I don't really know how they hook. So maybe I'm wrong. Actually, they are more like hooks. Maybe they would go that way then? I don't know. Yeah, anyway, enough about that. I gave this car a, excuse me while I double check to make sure. I think it was a 5 out of 10, but better safe than sorry. Yes, 5 out of 10 for the way that it looks. Which, yeah, I think it's got some good ideas. I'm not sure if it quite looks 80s, and it is a bit messy in execution in some places. Anyway, chassis, partial aluminium panels. It's a bit weird, I'm not sure what that's about. Considering for this sort of challenge, full aluminium's sort of better in every single way. I mean, it hurts comfort and safety a bit, but I don't think that's too hard to meet the minimums with this setup. Then carbon fibre chassis, mid-longitudinal, and double wishbones front and rear, your pretty standard setup. This engine I do like. It's 6.5 litre V10 all aluminium and overhead cam, so it makes a nice change of pace. And it is just a naturally aspirated screaming engine. Pretty good, just sort of the bare minimum it needs to work there. 100 cam profile, which again, sort of there's a bit more power to be gained by lowering it. Obviously, you do sacrifice power at the very top here, like that wouldn't be 580 at 6.5 or 575 even. You would lose a bit up there, but you'd gain more over here. Maybe you get a better average power since you'd get more peak power as well. Just to demonstrate, 607, and well, it starts knocking, so you'd need to make some more adjustments there. Naturally aspirated, as I said, multi-point twin intakes, performance intake, and a runs on super, kind of a lean fuel mix, then 100 ignition timing. Bet you there's more to gain just by lowering it a bit, or it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder actually with this. Well, actually, no, because you can increase compression and stuff like that. Maybe, fair enough then. Maybe I am wrong sometimes about the ignition timing. There are definitely times though where it is more optimal to lower it slightly than to run 100. Race header, sorry, with high flow cats and 2 straight throughs. 61 loudness for a naturally aspirated car with quite a big engine and an aluminium block and things like that. It's not too bad loudness, shouldn't hurt comfort too badly. But yeah, it's all-wheel drive, with a top speed of 207 miles an hour. Thanks to all-wheel drive, a bit quicker. Has another viscous diff. I think this is the episode of viscous diffs. I think, does every single car in this episode have it? It might. But yeah, 4.2 seconds, not bad. And it is sort of geared for it in first gear. Minimise wheel spin, but still get a decent time. 5 gears, all standard stuff. 255s front and rear. And it does have a constant oversteer handling curve, but it does get some good handling forces, or cornering forces rather, on sports compound tyres. So that is quite impressive. Solid discs, which I really don't get. I think this car will have some major issues with brake fade. 50% sportiness there, sportiness brake fade penalty even. Yeah, I think just lowering it or adjusting it to vented discs would help a lot. You can see already there's a big drop there. I think just increasing them in size would help a lot. There's also some good weight savings to be made there. So there's that, but you can see actually if I just change the front to vented, sportiness goes up to 50 and 54. So there is quite a lot of gains to be made there, and a bit of an issue there. This is sort of the extreme side of brake fade I was talking about earlier. You can get away with running lower percentages. I'd say anything under 10% when you've got this sort of extreme top speed is sort of acceptable. I mean, obviously it's not perfect, but no amount of brake fade ever is. But yeah, I think at that point, just a bit extreme. Cooling airflow at 47. I did test it out. Just lowering cooling airflow and adjusting gearing, you could get this to over, I think 212 miles an hour was the limit I got to, which yeah, I think's pretty good. I am surprised actually that they did leave a bit of reliability there. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I like to push the very limit. It has good downforce on the rear. I think that's enough to be somewhat useful at least. But whether it's really the sort of, or this track is sort of the track that you need downforce on, I'm not sure. Although it might help it in BeamNG in sort of not being too oversteery. Sport interior, premium cassette, so it is quite fancy. Probably helps explain that very high prestige actually, almost 70. Variable hydraulic, no ABS though, and then just basic 70s with -8 quality. Not sure why they went for basic 70s. You can get away with running basic 80s and negative. And I think I tested it out. You can see some big gains by moving up to advanced or standard. I can't remember which is better for just like outright negative quality or weight saving with negative quality. But yeah, even just going to 80s, because there's no penalty to engineering time and price isn't an issue. So yeah, a bit of a mistake there. Air suspension, adaptive dampers, and then yeah, quite stiff suspension. It's not quite as low as the last car we had. Would probably fail the shoe test actually, but still some decent roll angle. Well, decent as in not high. And it is sort of optimised around the drivability line with a comfort preset or test load. That's the word. So yeah, that is just decent setup. I wouldn't say it's particularly optimised for sportiness, as we can see it's quite low, but sort of as a more concept car approach, I guess. It does work. I do think this might be a bit of a handful. I'm not sure how efficient it's going to be as a naturally aspirated engine. Maybe it will do well. I'm actually curious quickly. It does have good efficiency across the range. In fact, it is most efficient at high RPM, which I suppose actually is probably one of the benefits of having a high cam profile. This might surprise in how good it is if it's quick, because it probably won't use an awful lot of fuel. But yeah, there we go. From my Comp 7, the Ecomobile All-In. This, using the Lister Storm body, definitely sort of reminds me of that homologation spec GT1 style cars, even though I don't think GT1 existed in '88. What would it have been? Group B touring cars, road racing, sports cars, whatever. Whatever the category is called. It's that sort of thing, in my opinion. It does. I don't know. I'm sort of torn on the styling of this. On one hand, it's exactly what the '80s it was about, late '80s. This sort of extreme, sort of clearly race-inspired car. On the other hand, though, I don't think it's particularly good looking. I think it's it's not the prettiest looking things, but at the same time, it's that sort of outrageous function over form, sort of. I mean, it's automation, so not really, but yeah, it's that sort of thing, and yeah, I can't decide if I liked it or not. Does I don't know? It's just sort of aggressive looking. Does have some nice details with all the vents and things. And I do think this is a very unique use for those vents. In fact, are those just trim pieces, or is that actually part of the body? I'm not even sure how they've done that. Maybe that's just what the body does. No, I assume they've pulled it. I don't know. Looks like they have, but whatever the case, however they did that, yeah, I think it's got some good things, and it is well designed. I gave it a 7 out of 10. I'm still not sure if I agree with myself there. Also, is that a wing? It is. Nice. Well hidden. Yeah, I don't know. Not sure I entirely agree with myself there, but that's the score I've given it. I think it does fit the brief of an 80s sports car, being extreme and loud, and it is. I like the sort of theme of it being a race car sort of thing, and it is definitely reflected in the mechanical side. So yeah, let's talk about that then. Aluminium body panels, space frame chassis, and it is mid-engined, even if not all the vents and stuff reflect that. And yeah, I would have thought with vents like that it'd be front engine, but shush, don't think about it too hard. So yeah, space frame chassis and stuff, very sort of race car-esque. It does have a tiny V10, 2.7 litre. I believe this is the third smallest engine in this entire challenge. And the next smallest engine is up next. But yeah, overhead cam, 4 valves, all aluminium, 2.7 litre with a very short stroke. I think, yeah, the only reason it's using forged... No, it's not even using forged internals. It just can cope with the amount of power, or sort of lack of power it's making, I suppose. Maybe try and get away with running loads of negative quality to save some engineering time? I don't know. Could do. There's a bit left over. Extremely low compression timing. Compression ratio, I guess. Which, yeah, I'm not really sure why. I'd imagine you can see some significant power gains just by pulling that up a bit. Run less boost or whatever. Speaking of the turbo, yeah, it's a pretty standard turbo set. Maybe a bit big on the compressor. I'd imagine you can see a bit of gains by adjusting the compressor, but there we go. Still decent amount of power, over 100 horsepower per litre. It's running very lean with quite an aggressive ignition timing, twin throttles, performance intake, and yeah, just a standard freeway cat, which, yeah, a bit weird. There's some leftover room, so unless somehow it lost power by opening it, I don't know. No, not even that. So it does cause it to knock, I guess. Maybe that's why. Yeah, weird actually that it's having so much issues with that. I guess just because it's running very lean and very high ignition timing, and then just a straight through muffler to finish it off. Rear-wheel drive, I mean, it being a fairly low power car, it's not going to have the craziest of top speeds. It's old, it's sort of draggy. It's in the 80s, and it does have a big wing with a decent amount of downforce, so it is isn't going to reach the highest of speed. What's that? 168, 100, yeah, 168, 169. Nice. Yeah, and 6.4 seconds 0 to 60. So it's not crazy quick. In fact, I think this is one of the slower cars we got, at least out of proper performance cars. And again, viscous diff. Could probably adjust the spacing a bit to make it accelerate a bit quicker. I don't think it really needs to be geared out that long, considering you've still got this sort of flat power curve here. You could shorten the gear ratios a bit and tighten up the spacing. 230 and 270 width tyres. I suppose that's sort of a race car thing to have tyre sizes ending with 0. And it is running on a very oversteery setup. Actually, that's a surprisingly big gap. Might be a handful in BeamNG, we'll have to see. Actually, some very low profile tyres, 35 on the rear. Yeah, that's well, it's not going to do the passenger spines any favour, although it is quite comfortable apparently. So there we go, and it is only on sports compound. Oh, only. But yeah, not semi-slicks like the first car we had today. Vented discs then, only one piston, solid discs on the rear actually, but made very big, so there's no brake fade issues. Well, that combined with a low top speed, I suppose helps. There's some reliability that you could get rid of by lowering cooling airflow, and actually you could have a fully clad undertray, so I'm not too sure what that's about. And yeah, interestingly, there's loads of engineering time left. I assume it's space frame, so that explains that. So I just thought, I wonder if they misread it as 150 production units. Is it the same bit? No, it's not. I don't know, maybe that's just a weird coincidence, but yeah, it's well under the engineering time limit. So yeah, it seems a bit weird that they didn't try and properly fill it out, unless of course they did make that mistake. Luxury interior, standard cassette, so it is, well, that does help explain the comfort. And yeah, standard 80 safety, not trying to game it or anything. And then hydraulic power steering, not variable or none, which again, I mean, I guess it's sort of heavy, so that does sort of explain it, and it's not like sort of flat out race car with that comfort, but still. And it does have ABS, which test driver will approve of. Standard springs then, gas monotube, and then yeah, quite a soft suspension setup actually. Doesn't really look optimized for anything in particular, just sort of a soft, balanced setup. From Echo Waffle 8, the Shibu, a sort of kit car inspired thing is what I get from this. Personally, not a fan of the way it looks. It just doesn't really work or look like much effort was put into it. I think even things like the way the lights fit into the vent at the back here, sort of, I don't know, just the chrome edge versus the plastic and things like that just doesn't really work in my opinion. There are some nice details, I suppose the hinges at the top here. Otherwise, yeah, not a lot to talk about. I do think the pop-ups as well look a bit awkward, and also that doesn't look like it'd fit, but I won't question it. Also, it sort of has 3 spokes, which, I mean, I hate. No, I think hate is the appropriate word. 3 spokes, but I don't feel too bad about penalising Cal for it, because this one clearly doesn't. I don't think these fit the time period at all. These look a lot more modern than 80s, and I'm going to stop looking at them now. So yeah, it sort of has like a cheap kit car look. I just don't think it really works for this challenge, so I gave it a 2 out of 10 because it is trying to be a sport / supercar thing, and it's not flat out offensive looking or just totally out of the brief of this challenge. But yeah, just not good enough for this, I guess. Well, that sounds really harsh. I don't know. I don't like being harsh, but at the same time, you need to sort of judge critically, I guess. Anyway, yeah, aluminium panelled monocoque and galvanised steel chassis. So maybe less kit car once you get down to the chassis. Transverse double wishbones front and rear. The engine, smallest engine that we got submitted as Challenger, 2.5 litre inline 4, dual overhead cam, obviously all that good stuff, with 442 horsepower. This thing is going to be mildly terrifying, probably. Surprisingly, none of this is overbuilt, if I remember correctly. Yeah, no, the makes so much torque, it actually needs a billet steel crank, which, yeah, seems insane and totally crazy, but it does need it. Running 2.25 bar of boost, and yeah, there's not really too much to talk about there. Fairly standard sort of sporty setup there. Very rich fuel mixture, and sort of middle of road ignition timing, with a throttle per cylinder, performance intake, and yeah, running on the best fuel, and just a high flow 3-way with 2 straight through mufflers. Very just aggressive and racy engine, lots of performance. Not sure if this is even like the most you can get out of it. I mean, well, it's clearly a bit more in the cam profile and stuff, but and yeah, I suppose a race intake, but still, yeah, very aggressive, and well, I was about to say very inefficient, but not really. I'm sure it does dip under 6%, but that's not sort of, I don't think that's even the lowest we've had. We have had worse. So yeah, interestingly, this car only has a 4-speed, and for some reason is speed limited. I really don't get this at all. I think the only reason I could potentially think of, because by increasing it you get better prestige and sportiness. That's like 2 of the scored stats here, or both of them. So like everything it benefits and everything it hurts doesn't really matter. The only thing I could think of is by increasing the top speed it looks like brake fade gets worse, when in actual fact it stays the same. It's just you're braking from a higher speed, so the brakes fade more. That makes sense. Basically it would have no effect on BeamNG unless this actually does get to over 155 on the course, which would sort of surprise me. 147 what? I meant to say 4.7 seconds 0 to 60. Again, by sort of adjusting the gearing, that can go down a bit. Wheel spin isn't too crazy, or in fact even if it had a 5-speed probably. But yeah, instead just a 4-speed. Has a geared diff though, so some difference I suppose to everything else in this episode so far. Actually this car is kind of very unique. Sports compound tyres, 185s front, 225s rear. Yeah, sort of narrow for the power, but it doesn't wheel spin too much. Maybe it'll be alright on the course. Vented discs, very powerful brakes, and well, I've already mentioned the brake fade. There's only a bit, it's nothing too crazy, and sort of quite comfortable pads. It is just about over the comfort minimum, so that makes sense. Although I do think 3 pistons maybe a bit overkill. Probably just by adjusting the brakes alone you could get this to under 1,000 kilograms. Well, I had to try, and no, as it turns out I was completely wrong there. And that's a terrible brake setup, so we're going to put that back. Well, it was worth a shot, just to see, for my own curiosity. Another semi-clad under tray, with some raised cooling airflow. There was a bit of wiggle room there with reliability, still, so I'm just going to adjust that to reset the stats. Yeah, I actually just click that, better. Yeah, a bit of rear downforce thanks to that wing and some wing angle, but it's nothing sort of crazy. Hide the free spokes. And yeah, then just a premium, double premium interior. Sort of, well, I think this is premium interiors, or yeah, just premium interiors, one of the cheapest interiors we've had to this challenge, but premium cassette, quite expensive. Bit weird actually how that works out. That's sort of a, well, I suppose you would run premium, I don't know. It does make sense then, yeah, I suppose. Again, advanced 70s, not really sure what that's about. I mean, it is an 84 car, so maybe it was modernised. I just didn't change that for whatever reason. But yeah, you do have actually some room on safety. And could you go under 1,000? Maybe? You can, just about. There we go, I've satisfied my curiosity there. Just saying, does wheel spin? Yeah, wheel spin goes up as it gets lighter. I suppose that makes sense, but yeah. And then adaptive dampers are quite fancy, and suspension doesn't really seem to be optimised for anything in particular. Front seems to be a bit stiff, so there's that, and it does have quite stiff sway bars, but it is running quite high ride height. I think it is sort of narrower than a lot of cars, so yeah, roll angle does look strangely high. Also very soft dampers, so I suppose that helps explain it too. This thing, I think it's going to be a bit of a wild card. It does actually, I think, have the second lowest fuel economy as well. It'll be curious to see how this does around the track, but we'll have to wait and see for that. From Luftein, we have the Eris Falcon. Falcon? Yeah. Interesting styled car. There's some very weird things going on. If you look at this, it's all fairly standard stuff. Oh, you're gonna see some weird setup. But yeah, let's talk about the visuals first. It's had some care put into it. I do like little things like the trim running across it, and I've just noticed the fuel filler cap on the bonnet there. Maybe not the most functional setup. It does so these wheels and how big they are, I think that's 700mm diameter. I think it's diameter, yeah. It does sort of give it a slightly supercar crossover look. Reminds me a bit of the Mega Track, if you've ever seen that. All-wheel drive V12 four-seater supercar that sort of had a raised ride height. Sort of reminds me of that in a weird sort of way. Just slightly bizarre, but there we go. Yeah, I think it does do some good things. I think there's sort of a bit of a disconnect between the front and the back. The front is sort of very sleek and minimalist. I think too minimalist, to be honest. I think it's lacking a bit of something there, but it does, I don't know, it just has a grille, headlights. It does have some badging and stuff, but I think maybe, I don't know, maybe it's just missing something, or maybe I'm just being picky, I don't know. But at the back here, it's got a sort of much older style rear here. I do like the way they've used a grille piece, these like little pieces going across to connect the taillights. I think they do fit nicely. They blend together almost seamlessly, to be fair. So I might steal that in the future if I do this sort of setup. So there's that, and the back of it does look good, but I think it just sort of disconnects from the front. It's just too different, if that makes sense. Front very sleek, and the back sort of a bit boxier, and so it doesn't look as great. So for the styling, I ended up giving it a 5. I think there's some good ideas going on, but much like Emile's car earlier, I think it just wasn't executed in the best way. I do like things like the badging and stuff. Maybe again the chrome font, not the best way of executing that. But yeah, it's although I suppose it does match the front there. So I don't know, it seems a bit odd. It's a shame really you can't colour text, because I think actually the body colour on here would have looked fantastic as sort of letters. Maybe that'll come at some point, but I don't know. Anyway, mechanical side of it. Fiberglass panel, carbon fibre chassis, very lightweight, sporty design. It's decently light, I think. Yeah, 1,237 kilograms. Not too crazy. What is crazy is this engine. You can see here, it makes absolutely no low-end power. yeah, if you have a 500 horsepower car and you're going to 5,600 RPM and you're only making 200 horsepower, then you've got an issue. Yeah, just way too much turbo lag. It's a box of 6, says 4 litre, variant capacity is 3 litres I suppose it rains to, with loads of forged internals. Very aggressive cam profile, overly so actually if you reduce it. You can see some decent gains. And then yeah, this turbo setup is the compressor and the turbine is way too big. Everything is all green here, which is an absolute no-go. I have a turbo tutorial, just because automation turbos are really fiddly. Really, I need to go back and adjust that, because since I made that, they changed how turbos work, and basically the stats you're aiming for, or the numbers you're aiming for on compressor and turbine have changed slightly. So yeah, expect probably another video on that soonish, maybe. Multi-point then, race intakes with a very aggressive ignition timing there, totally advanced, and then just no mufflers at all, relying on the turbo to keep it quiet, which it doesn't really. It's 70 loudness, which I suppose is fine for a supercar if you're going down sportiness route. Not so much for like a more prestigious, comfortable supercar, hypercar, whatever. What I would like to do quickly is just sort of adjust the turbo, or hold the engine, adjust the turbo to show just sort of the gains that can be done on this. So I'm going to do that in a second. Alright, so just as an example here, I've sort of shrunk the turbo down. In automation you want a low turbo and a high AR ratio. I also slightly lowered the cam profile a bit, but I didn't adjust anything else. Just to demonstrate here, there's a 10 horsepower difference there, 8 horsepower difference, and you make power a lot earlier. I know a lot of people see this sort of kick in torque and power. This is a very laggy setup still, it's not great at all, but people see this sort of wall of torque and think that means that the engine is bad. No, you want that wall of torque as early as possible, really. You basically just want to have it, ideally you'd want it to, well, just start off at as high as possible and go down from there, like an electric motor, but the second best thing is to have it as early as possible, essentially. So anyway, I'm going to revert it back to as it was, and we just need to update it slightly. Was it 102? I think it was 102. That's a problem, I think. Alright, so I messed up there slightly. I don't remember any of the previous stats. I'm sorry about that. I adjusted it and wasn't paying attention to what the original figure was. I don't think that's going to affect. Actually, have any stats changed? No. Okay, I'm going to assume that was the right number. Let's talk about the gearing. You can see all that turbo lag is causing some issues. This car has a top speed of 112 miles an hour. It's overgeared like crazy. Also another viscous diff. That's 4 out of 5 this episode. Yeah, really overgeared. Again, just by shortening the gear ratios, you can see now there's about to be some big jumps in top speed. Just by shortening it, and then yeah, I do that and it goes all the way to 170, what is it, 173 miles an hour. Yeah, and then of course the gearing, it's still spaced low, but it is at least a bit quicker. It needs spacing like this just to get it moving, because there's so much lag. You need as much power down low as possible. Yeah, just all that turbo lag really hurts it. Otherwise on the car, I mean, handling is fine. It is all-wheel drive, although that does seem a bit overkill for this, considering the acceleration and low down power. very wide difference in tyres. 215s at the front and 285s at the rear. Should at least mean it's stable and predictable, but maybe sacrificing too much, although it does still make very good cornering forces. 1.13G is yeah, pretty impressive. And yeah, the brakes on the other hand, the front brakes you can see here aren't powerful enough to lock the tyres, while the rear brakes are, so that does mean that you might have some issues with the brake sort of acting as a handbrake. It doesn't have ABS, so yeah, there's a very real possibility actually if you press the brakes too hard. Yeah, you usually it's more predictable and easy if the front brakes are more powerful compared to the tyre versus the rear brakes. Basically, you want the gap between the dark lines to be bigger than the light. Or the gap between the red lines to be wider than the blue lines, and you want the dark lines to be above the lighter lines of the same colour, if that makes sense. Maybe not the easiest thing to hear me say, but maybe I'll write it down or something. Probably won't remember. Yeah, anyway, front wing angle, very aggressive. It's just got a front lip there, but you know, 160, 70 kilograms of downforce, that's pretty good, and it does have a rear wing, so that's going to be effective in BeamNG. It also has a little spoiler there, but that and that lip won't be doing anything in BeamNG, but at least the wing will be, so should be quite stable at least. Premium interior and basic cassette, one of the cheapest interiors we've got given, but it's still got a bit over the comfort minimum. And yeah, some variable hydraulic power steering, no traction aids, and no safety at all. It can get away with that thanks to it having a carbon fibre chassis, and there's probably some other things, probably the size of it, things like that. Air suspension, and I think that's basically just a standard sort of, it might not be, but that camber figure I think is 1.5 and 1 rear. But yeah, either way, it's sort of, it doesn't seem actually too optimized suspension wise for anything particular, but yeah, it as I've said already, very predictable, actually quite low roll angle, despite having kind of high ride height thanks to those tyres. But yeah, final car. Yeah, this one, bit of a mess thanks to that engine, really. I don't think this is going to perform well because of that, which is a bit of a shame because I think it does at least look cool and different. Maybe not the best executed, but it does. I do like it in its own way. Anyway, thank you for watching. Yeah, leave a like if you weren't offended or I haven't been too harsh on your car. So I'm going to get spammed with dislikes. Cool. Yeah. Anyway, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to be serious for once. And until next video, goodbye.